Good morning, and thank you for joining us today to talk about how to help international students currently studying in high schools and across the U.S. to continue their higher education here in the U.S. We welcome you on behalf of Study New York. My name is Joan Canlian. I'm with the U.S. Commercial Service based here in New York and have had the pleasure of working with Study New York since its founding 10 years ago. Next slide, Jennifer. I'll just give a little background on Study New York. We are a consortium of 40 plus colleges and universities spread across New York, representing all different types, urban, rural, large, small campuses. And the mission is to work collaboratively to promote New York State as the destination of choice for international students and scholars. Next slide. We have a website and a great social media presence. And so I encourage everyone who's watching to follow us on social media and visit our website. You'll find detailed information about all of the member institutions and studying in New York at the website. Next slide. I think shows some of our social media. So I encourage you to visit that. We, on our Facebook page, regularly promote different campuses. And so it's a great way to learn about different institutions in New York. And we highlight the variety of schools that are here and the opportunities. We also have a wonderful photo competition that we run every year. So you can get to see the student experiences and hear directly from students as to why they love studying in New York. Next slide. Here's a snapshot of the different member institutions. As I said, you can see it's a wide range of institutions across the state. And these are all institutions that are actively looking for and would welcome international students. I think with that, if we go to the next slide, I will hand it off to the next speaker.
My name is Tricia Harrett, and I have the privilege of working at SUNY Buffalo State. We just wanted to thank you so much for participating in this presentation today. We know that you're dedicated and care about your students, or you wouldn't be here. So we thank you very, very, very much. We really see a lot of advantages to staying in the US after someone's completed their secondary response. Just the simple fact that you don't have to go through all those documents again and gathering things. You can easily have your F1 transferred over to our universities and colleges. And we think there's a lot to offer in New York State for the simple fact that there's a lot of opportunities for OPT and CPT. There's opportunities for students to just stay and come to New York and be able to travel, as well as we have some universities that have some unique majors and programs and research, as well as we have a robust number of community colleges if people want to start a junior college experience to get their associates first. So we are just really thrilled with the fact that you are here and you're watching online to be able to find that transition for your students that have made friends, have host families, and don't necessarily want to leave right away and want to continue their academics. So thanks for joining us.
So hi, everybody. I am Stacey Aquero from Stony Brook University. Echo what everyone's saying. Thanks so much for joining today. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the application process and documents and standardized testing options. And of course, as counselors, many of you know all of this information, but often find questions or wondering, how is it different for my international students? What else do I have to submit? Are there anything additional or different types of applications? So next slide, please. And as you probably know from hearing from us so many times throughout your career as counselors, it depends on the college that the student's applying to, right? Years and years ago, when I started in admissions and higher ed, there used to be many times where there'd be a separate international application. You might have a freshman application, a transfer application, and an international application. And of course, I'm going back to those good old paper days when I used to have tons of paper cuts from manila folders. I'm just showing my age as well. But really, most schools nowadays, applications are online, whether it's the common application, the coalition application, an individual school application, or of course, some of us here are part of the SUNY system and part of the SUNY application. And of course, other states, for any of you who are representing other states, or of course, students who are applying to other states, other state systems exist like Texas and California and things like that. So it's probably more on the rare side that there would be a separate international student application. A lot of times what happens is the students feel that there would be a separate application, but their immigration status when they are filling out the common application or the coalition application is going to indicate to the individual school that they are in fact a international student, and that's by the student indicating to them on their application that they're on an F1 visa. Of course, we could also talk about how that works when I'm sure you have a lot of students who fall under other immigration categories and under DACA and things like that, and sometimes they get categorized as international students. And just know to contact each school, have the student contact us, and we kind of clear that all up, but sometimes that happens as well. In addition, of course, the application itself is relatively the same. Students would have to complete an essay and/or personal statement, any supplemental essays, again, depending upon the individual institution, letter or letters of reference, extracurricular activities, academic records, high school transcripts since grade 9, as well as any college transcripts if there's any dual enrollment, or in case there's any counselors here who are also helping students who might be transferring. And then any other supplemental application materials, perhaps honors programs that are in addition, or scholarships. I like to point out during this time that students would, during COVID times, of course, that the academic profile, the school profile, is really important to complete how the student's school handled COVID. Was it online? Was it pass fail? And then, of course, this is also an opportunity to, if some of your international students have not attended your school since grade 9, perhaps they did a portion of their school either at another school or in particular in their home country. I know at Stony Brook, we would require still those original or those official transcripts from their first school as well, even if it is on the new academic record. So that's going to be another case where each school will or each university will require things slightly different in terms of their academic records. The other thing I like to point out, this of course is not just for our international students, but really for all students, is the extracurricular activities. We've been really allowing students and telling students that we know that activities have not been as robust as they might have been prior to COVID. There have been tremendous amount of restrictions, and your space in the application, whether it's in your school profile or the student uses the space in other areas, to explain how that has been impacted. And we would never negatively look at a student's application because they did not have access to extracurriculars because of COVID. What I have been telling students is to really look within themselves, look at things that they are doing outside of the classroom, at home, perhaps in their community, their hobbies, and really just explain, the part of extracurricular activities is to help understand what a student likes to do, a little bit of organization, it also explains sort of that they have some organization and time management and leadership. So there's a number of ways that a student can all explain that versus an organized school activity. So next slide, please. So then, of course, the other component of application materials is standardized test scores. And of course, when international admissions offices talk about standardized test scores, we particularly are talking about SAT or ACT versus English proficiency. And after my slide, we're going to talk specifically about English proficiency, but there is a major difference between are you requiring standardized test scores and are you requiring English proficiency? Particularly for a university, if they are requiring standardized test scores, SAT or ACT for international students, they are going to let you know that they are not test optional for international students and must require that. Of course, many schools, probably most of the schools, at least on this call here, are test optional for fall 22. And again, another example of every school is going to be different as to when they are test optional through. So each school will, might be test optional through past fall 22, but some do not know yet and are waiting for SUNY to let us know. There are schools that are test blind, meaning that they will not at all look at an SAT or ACT in considering a student's application. But again, in these cases, they might still require an English proficiency exam. There are times that test optional have exceptions, and this could be specific majors or again, honors programs or scholarships. So a student is really going to want to consider whether or not to take the SAT or ACT or to submit those scores. The other thing is, keep in mind, being that they are studying in the US, if you are helping students who are studying in the US, sometimes that might be required because they are part of the US curriculum. So again, every school is going to be different. And really the sort of how to know if you should have your students submit the SAT scores, especially because SAT scores a lot of times can also be used for English proficiency. I really recommend that students and counselors advising students make sure that they talk to the admissions offices or look online to see what that sort of middle 50% is. If they are in that range, then probably is okay to send. If not, then I generally say do not send. If they are going to use that score for English proficiency, know that we're going to use the whole score for admission. So it's really something to consider when submitting SAT scores. And now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague to talk more about the English proficiency difference.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Esser, and I am part of Fordham University's undergraduate admissions office. I, like Stacy, can remember back to the days of paper applications, so I'll just jump in there with her. We are in a different era now, obviously, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about English language testing and waivers. You can go to the next slide, please. So Stacy gave me a great introduction. I think there's a lot to consider with regard to submitting testing these days. Obviously, different institutions have different policies. And I think that the same is true for SAT, ACT as for English language proficiency testing. Every school might have a different set of requirements for different subsets of students. And so I think it really behooves individual students to research each school specifically. I work at a school that's very strict about English language testing requirements. And so we get comments from students every year. Oh, I finished high school in the US, or, oh, I got this SAT, evidence-based reading and writing score. And for my institution, neither of those is okay as an English language proficiency, proof of English language proficiency. We actually want one of the standardized test results specific to English language testing. That said, plenty of schools do accept a specific SAT evidence-based reading and writing score or an ACT English score in lieu of a TOEFL or IELTS or some other English language proficiency test. And I think that the complication there is just what Stacy said. If you're submitting SAT, ACT, that's also probably going to, to meet the requirement of English language proficiency, it's also going to be looked at as a SAT, ACT score. So students have to be, I don't know if strategic is the right word, but careful in kind of how they choose to submit SAT, ACT to schools that are now test optional for those tests. There are other institutions for whom it is perfectly fine for a student who graduates from a US high school or a New York State school, that can meet the English language proficiency requirement for some institutions. As I said, there are schools like mine for whom both of those are not okay, and we look for specific test results. What tests schools will accept varies quite a bit. So TOEFL is a pretty standard test. Many schools will accept that. IELTS similarly. That there are the newer tests that are coming out, like in the last few years, the Duolingo DET test has been a really popular test for low cost, being able to take the test at home. Some institutions will accept that, other institutions will not. So, it really requires kind of individual research. And I think a lot of schools also use a physical waiver. Students go in and fill out information and request a waiver to the English language proficiency requirement. And, again, that might be individual to each school. Some schools have them, some schools don't. So it can really run the gamut. And I think, students have to be thoughtful in where they're applying and do the research ahead of time, because obviously if these tests are required, students have to, take the test in order to receive results in time for their application deadlines. So I think it's really broader than a lot of students realize, and sometimes, broader set of options than counselors realize. So I'm not sure that this was hugely helpful, and that it comes down again to the kind of old, it depends on the school. But I do think it's good to be aware of the wide variety of requirements that different institutions have. So I hope that helps. And now I pass it along.
Hi, I'm Jackie Vogel, and I'm from the State University of New York at Plattsburgh in the northeast corner of New York State, where it is raining today, but it's sometimes very beautiful, as it has been for the last couple of days. So today I'm going to talk about international scholarships and grants, or more generally speaking, sort of financing the student experience at colleges and universities in the United States. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about institutional gift aid. Institutional awarding philosophies, as everyone has said, varies dramatically from one institution to another. And I think the ends of the spectrum are the schools that give a lot of money to a very selective pool of applicants. And those might be the schools that are offering either full or close to full scholarships for students. They are not generally giving those to every applicant who's acceptable, but rather to a select population of applicants who meet their criteria. Those are generally, I would have to say, private schools at the undergraduate level, more likely than public institutions. And then there are schools that give a pool of money and try to spread it out among a wider pool of applicants. And so in that case, of course, the pool of money might be the same amount, but it is given to a wide pool, and therefore the amount that's given to any one student would be, of course, less and wouldn't be a full scholarship by and large. So institutional awarding philosophy, you're not going to find that on their websites. You'll see it as to when you get their scholarship awards. So institutional gift aid is an umbrella term, which means that generally speaking, no repayment is required. And of course, scholarships are usually based on some sort of unique talent or ability. Many cases, those are academic talents. But of course, there are other talents. And so while everybody thinks about academic or athletic scholarships, which can be quite valuable, there are also talented scholarships for talent that are smaller, but put together could add up to a very nice scholarship package. And usually those awards are given by schools that have placed a particular interest on that talent. So it might be the music school that's giving a music award. Grants are usually less sort of individualized. They're more often based on institutional priorities, but they are also monies that are not required for repayment, and they can be need-based, often are need-based. Many schools use something called the College Board CASS profile or a version thereof. We have one that has been kind of tailored to our institution that is based on that profile. And the last kind of institutional gift aid I would want to mention is institutional work study. That's a very unusual one, but one I really like the idea of, because the student is getting some work experience and professional development skills while earning some money to use toward their unbilled expenses. So if you haven't thought about that in the past, I think that's a really good thing to think about. It all comes together to form a package, as you would imagine in any other with a domestic student. The other piece that I sometimes see is that there are some funds that are available from this country of citizenship for a student in the form of loans. Canadian students, for example, can qualify for loans and grants from their home province. Norway can give grants for study abroad, either for a visiting student or a degree-seeking student. So if you're working with an individual student from another country, of course, an international student, you may want to check in with them about whether they've investigated that option. And now the next slide is what you've all been waiting for, is like that silver bullet that'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know about scholarships for international students. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that I looked and I didn't find one. So, but I did find these sources, which I think might be helpful. I really do like College Board Big Future Search, because you can filter for various criteria. And one of the filters is aid for international students. So by and large, that would help you narrow down the list a bit. Education USA is always a good resource, and they have an entire section on financing your studies. Again, not necessarily about scholarships, but helping students to figure out how to pull it all together. And if you happen to be a member of the Council of International Schools, they do have a really good chart about the financial aid to international students. And it not only shows how much money they award and to what percentage of their incoming students, but also what the net cost is, which is if a student is price sensitive, that is the most important piece of the equation. All these resources will be available to you that you can check out, and I will move along. Thanks so much.
So Tricia Hara at SUNY Buffalo State, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm so glad that we've got representatives on the attendees today from New York, of course, and Florida and DC. So thank you so much for giving up your time and joining us. One thing about COVID that I have enjoyed is having more of a virtual platform to be able to connect with people, especially the athletes. So a lot of times mom and dad back home or host families here have lots of questions about the athletes when their students are looking to apply. Just yesterday, I was on the phone and it ties so nicely into Jackie's presentation, because they want to know, what's it going to cost me? And can my athlete get any scholarships? And all of us on the call know that athletic scholarships are pretty much Division I. There's other funding sources that can be done for international students that happen to be athletes, but we're kind of limited what we can do. And so a lot of us look at very creative ways of supporting our students. So I just wanted to, I don't have a lot on the next slide that Jennifer's going to share with you, but it's just some pictures of some famous students that we have on campus that are athletes. So she wants to change that. So I really wanted to say, why encourage your athletic student that's in your secondary school right now to continue to stay in the US. They get some perks being athletes. They get a priority class selection at a lot of schools because they need playtime for practices as well as games. So they're first in the pool to be able to select classes, and that helps them stay on time for graduation as well. So that's a great way to make sure that they're going to complete that in a timely manner. Some of our athletes even finish ahead of time because they're very motivated to get things done. We all know that teamwork and group work experience, it's also a great way to boost their CV if they ever want to do OPT after they graduate. It's going to enhance their resume to show that they've done some sports. On our particular campus, Jackie mentioned about, she used the term work study. I would say that The coaches are very sensitive, knowing that their athletes need work experience. So, for example, I have a lot of hockey pitchers. I mean, we are in New York. So the open skate hours, like they're the ones working and handing out sports equipment and skate rentals and overseeing that. And they even have a program where they teach children to skate. So those type of things the coaches are aware of, and they are actively trying to recruit. If the student is in the US, the coaches are still trying to get to the high schools and seeing them. But in the day and age with video, virtual things can be sent as well. So if you happen to have a student that was there in their junior year, but they're back home because of COVID or whatever, and they just are asking you questions, like still have them apply. They can do old films or current films. Our coaches are very active in the entire process of how to apply, and they're a great resource. Also, I find that our athletes are usually very, very high GPAs because they have to be so careful with their time management and making sure they're getting their studies done. They're used to working in group presentations. I think that's one of the most challenging things for students that come, especially from Asian cultures, to have to do group projects. And that is a big thing at university level. And the first time they have to do a group project, they're just kind of looking around. And I think those that are athletes are used to working as a team and groups, and it seems to be a little bit easier for them. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. And then the scholarship opportunities, like I said, we are not able to issue full rides for scholarships. And basically the parents are trying to decide, do we go to public or private, and what's it all going to work out? And anytime you have a parent or a host family with questions, we on the admissions side would be happy to talk to them, do a Zoom call with you as the high school guidance counselor. We want to be here and be a good resource for you. One of the reasons to do this webinar presentation is just meeting with people throughout New York State, saying, I've got a student from Haiti that wants to come. They have limited resources. How can we get them into university? So pick up the phone, send us an email. We'd be happy to just explore, because we want to be that genie that grants wishes for people to continue their studies in the US if we had a magic wand to wave. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our next presenter. Thanks, Emily.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Emily Gifford, and I work at Mohawk Valley Community College, which is in the center of New York State. So I'm going to talk about the advantages of community colleges and associate degrees. Jen, can you go to the next one? Okay, so I think that one of the big things is just as someone being from a different country and getting to have two unique experiences within the college atmosphere. So starting a community college, and then if they're planning to transfer, to go to a bigger school, so they can have sort of the small school setting, because most community colleges are a little bit smaller network, and then go on to a bigger school. It also provides two networks of people that you've met, right? So when you're going on to a career, or just trying to build a network of people that you're connected with, you have two sets of networks after you graduate. Also, it's a really great place to start if a student's not quite sure what they want to study. So we have, at least at Mohawk Valley Community College, we have 90 different degrees. So it gives a lot of options for students to be able to go from one to another if they want, or just do general studies and take a lot of the general education courses and get those out of the way, and then sort of figure out their direction for their next step. So for those of you not in New York State, the community colleges are all part of the Public State University of New York network. So it makes it very easy to transfer within the public school system. And they're affordable. So any students that might be having a little bit of a financial issue, especially because of COVID, we still have a bunch of federal and state funding that makes our colleges more affordable options, at least for the first 2 years, to help out with that. And as my colleague said, that there's many scholarships available too for international students. We have small class sizes, at least at MVCC, it's around 18 students per instructor. So we don't even have space for lectures. So students get to meet other peers and also their instructors and have that relationship. So a lot of us have been tossing around the term OPT and CPT, and for those of you at the high school level who might not know what that means, that's optional practical training, which is an opportunity with the F1 visa to be able to work in the United States after completing studies, or even sometimes before completing studies, but after 1 year. So one of the great things about doing a community college education is that OPT is available to students to apply after each level of education. So the associate degree sort of creates one more level of education. So they can apply to work in the United States in their degree study field after finishing their 2 years, and then they can apply again after finishing their bachelor's degree. So it actually creates one more opportunity of getting a year of work experience in the United States. We're also just happy to be everybody's backup school. So if the student doesn't get into the school of their choice, like community colleges can be that reassurance that they'll still be able to stay here and get the second opportunity to apply again. A lot of the SUNY schools and a lot of other schools will have a little bit, I don't want to say more relaxed, but like a little bit more welcoming policy to transfer in students. So that helps. And we have rolling admissions. So, even if they were really slow at getting things in for other schools and didn't make a deadline, we'll take them until the last minute. And I know that Stacy was explaining some of the admissions policies, and like MVCC and a lot of the community colleges have many fewer requirements. So it's really just, have you graduated from high school? Cool, come on in. And we have also a lot of access to ESL programs. If for some reason studying at your high school, they're still needing a little extra help with their English, then they can start with us and then carry on in another school or go into the workforce. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Kenyon, and I'm the Director of the International Student and Scholar Services Office here at SUNY Geneseo. So I'm here to talk to you about some more of the F1 visa issues that you might run into with your students. One question that we do see pretty frequently are, can an international student leave the US in between graduating high school and beginning their college program? And so we want to let you know that absolutely they can. And I have a few of the things that you need to keep in mind when advising those students. For the most part, it's really fairly simple and straightforward. A student who intends to start university immediately after completing their high school, so they're graduating in May and probably matriculating in August, those students need to be transferred to their new university no more than 60 days after their program completion date. So we want to make sure that those students are not completed in your system. If you think that any of your international students are going on to university here in the US, make sure to get that information from them no more than 60 days after the program completion date on their I-20 so that we can get them transferred into their new program. If that is not possible for some reason, let's say the student didn't get into their top choice school and they're scrambling to find something else at the last minute, if they don't make that 60-day window, they do need to leave the United States, but they still could get a new initial I-20 from their transfer in school. But that is not ideal. It's best to stay on one record your entire time that you're in the United States. And that includes changing levels from high school to, either associates or bachelor's level. And so we want to try and keep those students on the same I-20 record as much as humanly possible. So if you see a student that's really struggling to make a decision and they're coming up on the end of their 60-day grace period, it is best to advise them to go ahead and get that transfer completed. Things can always be changed later, but once your I-20 is completed, it's completed. So once the transfer is received at the transfer in school, the college or university will transfer it in, and we'll send a copy of that updated I-20 to the student. And the student should use their new college university updated I-20 to return to the United States when they come back. And I've had this happen two ways. Sometimes I can get that I-20 to the student before they leave the United States for vacation over the summer. Sometimes I have to mail it to them in their home country. Either way is all right, but as long as they have that university initial I-20 to come back with, they'll be in good shape. We do not want the student to return to the US with their high school I-20 that has completed. That will cause them a world of problems at the port of entry. And then finally, it's important to remind the student that they will be on an initial I-20 again. So it's like when they first came to the US initially to attend high school, they have to follow those same rules. They cannot come back unless it's 30 days or less until their new program begins. And many of us at the university level, we do have a date that we recommend the student come back. Maybe there's a mandatory orientation they need to be at. Maybe there's an earliest day that you can move into your residence hall. So the university or college will let the student know when we recommend that they arrive. And so it's just best that the student keeps in mind, sometimes they want to come and travel around to maybe do some sightseeing before school starts, and all that's perfect. Just make sure they don't come back too early. Maximum is 30 days before school starts. And I'm going to keep talking to you now a little bit more about these visa regulations. These are just some basic advising topics at the most surface level for students that are attending university. So again, about that transfer process, we want to make sure that we keep the students I-20 active until the requested transfer date. So just because school has ended, don't complete a record early, go ahead and let it go through the grace period so that if a student decides to transfer, that can be done. Another thing is that we want to make sure that you collect the proper documentation for that student before they transfer out. So we always recommend having a copy of the admission letter to the university or college, and that you keep that on file. I also recommend, some people are moving away from the forms, and I totally get that, but it is a good idea to have some kind of a transfer out confirmation from the student, be it something that the student signs. It could be a Google form, it could be a paper form. I too come from the paper application days, so I'm a little bit old school in that. But we do recommend that you have some kind of a documentation from the student that they have requested that you transfer them. And that's beyond just the admission letter, because the student may have been admitted to multiple colleges and didn't decide until later which one they wanted to attend. So I like to have something signed from the student. Yes, I want to be transferred on this date to this college or university. And that also helps you to avoid issues with potentially transferring someone to the wrong campus. I know a lot of us have run into this issue. I call it the branch campus problem, because the student doesn't always necessarily know if they were admitted to the main campus or a branch campus, or it could be a college with a similar name. Genesee Community College isn't on this call, but I can't even tell you how many students accidentally get transferred to Genesee Community College instead of Geneseo. Very similar names. It happens all the time. So this is another way for you to double check and make sure that you don't accidentally transfer someone to the wrong campus or to the wrong branch. So once that transfer is complete, the transfer in school will update the student's I-20 with the new major, the new level, new program dates, and your school information will change from the high school details to the college or university details, and it will generate a new initial, I say new, an updated initial I-20 for that student. So we do encourage students to obtain their new I-20 for university or college before they leave the US, because they will need it to come back. But as I mentioned before, it is possible for us to mail it to them overseas, and we're happy to do that. It is required to keep that documentation on file for 3 years after the student completes their program with you. And so just because the student is gone, make sure that you do keep something on file just in case you have an audit later down the road. And then I would also like to talk about just a few highlights of just, again, the very, very basic things that a student has to do once they get to the university level. They do need to maintain their I-20, and I believe this is similar to at secondary. A student needs to notify their DSO, which there's one of us at every college or university. They need to notify us within 10 days of any changes, like a change in address, a change in their major, if they get married and change their name, if they get a new passport and their name is spelled differently on the new passport than it was on the old one. I can't even tell you how many different scenarios there are, but any major changes, they do need to let us know within 10 days so that we can make those updates for them. Another very important one, probably the most important, is that a student does have to maintain full-time enrollment. And that's full-time enrollment as defined by the college or university. So I have the most common one that you'll run into here which is an undergrad student should be in at least 12 credit hours. But if you have a school that is maybe on a trimester system, that could vary a little bit. So it's as defined by that university, but most frequently you'll see it's generally 12 credit hours. There are a few caveats to that. If the student has a medical situation, or if it's their final semester and they need fewer than 12 credits to graduate, they could be authorized for less than that, but it does have to be authorized in advance. A student can't just take less than 12 hours and then tell us about it later. That actually is a pretty bad problem for a student. And then the biggest one, the one that I really drill into my students during every orientation, is work authorization. You must have work authorization to work. On-campus employment is the easiest. There's basically very little authorization that we have to give. We just have to verify to the on-campus employer that the student is eligible to work and they can work on campus basically as soon as they arrive with us. But off-campus employment always, always, always requires advance authorization. And this is basically the biggest thing a student can do wrong as an F1 visa holding student in the United States. It is the #1 problem that they could have, because if they're caught, there's basically no way to get out of it. You will be sent out of the country and you might not be able to come back for sometimes 10 years, sometimes ever. So we don't want this to happen to students. We don't want them to make a silly decision and go work at Starbucks or go work at a gas station and have that cost them the ability to be able to complete their degree in the United States. It's a silly mistake to make. So we really, really, really emphasize this to students. You absolutely cannot work without authorization. And as Emily mentioned a few minutes ago, there are several ways for a student to get that type of authorization. If a student has the opportunity to do an internship on campus with us, if they have, let's say, student teaching or a residency or some required part of their degree that requires them to go off campus and do some sort of work, we can authorize that for them. It's very simple. It doesn't cost the student anything. It's called CPT, Curricular Practical Training, and many of our international students are able to participate in that. OPT, Optional Practical Training, that Emily mentioned earlier, can be done post-completion, pre-completion, and there's even a STEM extension for students of STEM majors. And those students get an additional 2 years on top of their 1 year per level. So there is a lot of opportunity for students to work legally in the United States. And we're happy to advise students on the best ways to do that. And as Emily mentioned, it is a big advantage if you do attend community college. Because you get OPT at each level, you could have a year of OPT after your associate's degree. You could have another year after your bachelor's degree. If you're very industrious and you go on to a master's degree, that's another level. PhDs is a 4th level. So you can have as much OPT, frankly, as you want if you actually go through your entire education here in the United States. But there are advantages to attending a 2-year college. That's actually a benefit. You could maybe work for a year, earn some money, and then go on to your 4-year degree and have a little additional experience to show for it as well. So I hope that answered a few of your questions. At least we do want to leave some time for questions here at the end. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat. We'll be happy to answer those for you.
And just want to remind everybody that this will be recorded and we will share with you when it's posted. So you could share this with other folks on your campus or just have it for reference. But we do have a few minutes for questions and answers, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your experience about how many international students you currently have, maybe questions they've been asking you, or their level of interest. We'd love to hear about their level of interest in staying in the US for higher ed. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I agree. I think you're seeing a lot of nodding heads. So funding certainly is an issue. If I could also ask the attendees who are here, if you want to share with us maybe how the international students come to you. Is it that you're doing active recruitment, or is it more passive and perhaps they've come through word of mouth? think it's always interesting to see how students make those decisions to come to the US. And hopefully we can help them, encourage them to stay here in the US.
I will make a note on the funding. I think in the past 18, 19 months with COVID and being so much more connected to the international college community virtually through this, I have seen the availability of scholarships among many institutions for international students increase. Of course, it's not sort of full funding or sometimes enough funding, but for years, schools would not at all offer any kind of funding for international students, and it has increased tremendously the availability of opportunities for international students.
Yeah, just to kind of second that comment. I think at my institution, we've instituted new funding opportunities for international students in the last probably 3 to 4 years that we never had before. And it's allowed for a broader diversity of students to come in, both geographically and socioeconomically. We're a private institution in New York City, so we tend to have fairly high costs. I know compared to some of the folks representing institutions on this panel, but we've definitely been looking to diversify the funding opportunities for international students. And so I think that's not just us. I think that's happening. It might not be happening as quickly as all students want, but I do think that there is more of a more diverse set of opportunities now than there were years ago. And I do think, sometimes students have to kind of be, thorough in their searching for those opportunities. But I would encourage them to not give up. I mean, there is an institution out there for every student to come to higher ed in the US. There absolutely is. And it's just a question of kind of finding the right match. And that is not just academic match, that is also fiscal, financial match. So I know you can't do it all for them, but encourage them to keep looking.
Great, and I just put another resource for you in the chat. The U.S. Commercial Service, my division of the U.S. Department of Commerce, has offices throughout the U.S. And the way you've heard from the Study New York folks, there are study consortia in about 30 other states, some of which are actively engaged with the high school communities. So if you are looking to expand your international student enrollments at your institutions, please consider reaching out to me directly or to find your local commercial service office and work with one of my colleagues to learn about ways that we can help you expand your international student population. Great, well, I think we are coming up to the top of the hour, and I appreciate everybody's time today. If there are, we can stay on for just another minute and see if there are any other questions. Thank you. We'll be happy to reach out to you. And it's wonderful to have such a diverse group of high schools join us today. Again, to echo what everybody said, I think the good news about the situation is we're all much more comfortable on virtual, and I think connecting with people is actually easier than ever. Hopefully you will consider encourage your students to study here in the US, particularly here in New York. We'd love to have them, welcome them here, but do look forward to helping them stay in the US if they're interested. And thank you again. We appreciate everybody joining us today. And I think with that, we'll end the recording. Thank you.